In the early 90s, I was fortunate enough to have played several role-playing games, including Dragon Warrior and Final Fantasy on the NES, along with Sword of Vermilion on the Sega Genesis, and one of my all-time favorite RPGs, Final Fantasy II for the Super Nintendo. These games were more advanced than your typical video game adventures such as Zelda 2, and brought a fresh new genre to the table with a lot more strategy to video gaming. I found these types of games irresistible, but there was just one problem. There simply weren't that many titles available in 1991. Of course, this wasn't the case in Japan. For years, the Japanese had been enjoying an increasingly popular genre known as role-playing games, and intended to bring that same fever and passion for adventuring abroad to the United States. Granted, Final Fantasy II had been released in the US earlier in '91, but sales were less than stellar here, failing to even slightly capture the success of its Japanese counterpart. Although Squaresoft dumbed down the difficulty for American gamers to help ease us into this somewhat new style of game, sales were still underwhelming. What to do? Final Fantasy and the role-playing genre as a whole were such tremendous hits in Japan, there just had to be a way to translate this rapidly growing phenomenon into American bucks. Enter Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. Mystic Quest is considered to be an RPG for the entry-level player. Released in '92 and developed solely for beginning American players to help acquaint them with role-playing games, Mystic Quest is basically role-playing games for dummies. This game wasn't even developed for Japan at all, although it was released later on as Final Fantasy USA Mystic Quest. Now, like I mentioned before, I had played several RPGs prior to Mystic Quest's release, and was well aware that this game was aimed at beginners, so I never even bothered with it at all. Until now. Now, I knew damn well what I was getting myself into, and despite its reputation and foreboding lamentation from fellow gamers Kim and Cade, who were so disgusted with the simplicity of the game they just gave me the cartridge, thanks for the donation by the way, I decided to tackle this adventure for the very first time head-on and see for myself how this game holds up. In typical Final Fantasy fashion, the adventure begins in an interactive story sequence in which you escape from your crumbling village only to find a lone old man on top of a hill who then informs you of a foretold prophecy in which a heroic knight emerges to save 4 crystals which are being drained of light by powerful monsters which divide the world. Gee, I wonder who this heroic knight could be. Before long, you're teamed up with another party member, bringing your maximum total to 2. The game has several customizable options, such as switching your energy display from a meter to numbers, which is what I prefer being a seasoned RPGer. Your additional party member is also set on auto control by default, meaning that the game will select which actions this member will choose during battle. I really don't see any point to this. I mean, isn't the idea of this game to teach you how to play RPGs? Controlling multiple characters is an integral part of this. Luckily, this annoying option can be toggled on and off at any time with the Y button. Of course, it's just as easy to accidentally turn it on, too. Jeez, how many times did I do that? The game has its typical role-playing archetypes, such as towns with helpful villagers and monster-infested dungeons. The game also contains an overworld and numerous conflicts with baddies throughout. This is where the game differs from most RPGs. The overworld isn't free-roaming whatsoever, and is set up with linear paths which remind me of Super Mario Bros. 3 and Donkey Kong Country. Monster lairs pepper the landscape, containing 10 battles within each. No more, no less. These can be fought at your discretion, but keep in mind that several destinations are blocked by such lairs, and inaccessible until the lairs have been completely vanquished. This is how battling is done in the overworld. Mystic Quest is completely devoid of random monster battles. In dungeons, fights are initiated as you wish, coming into contact with a stationary monster sprite when ready to spill blood. If you fail to defeat the enemy, you're given a second chance, right then and there. This game is very forgiving in that regard, and is in many other ways as well. You can save and restart from any point in the game, excluding battles. Items located in chests regenerate once you leave and then return to the same room. This makes stockpiling on items such as cures and explosives a cinch, rarely needing to use your hard-earned cash to buy items. Money, along with experience, is earned like in most RPGs, by defeating enemies. But really, the majority of your moolah will go towards resting at the inn, as there are no weapon and armor shops. These items are automatically equipped once found, upgrading and replacing the current one. You also have the ability to carry multiple weapons, which can be switched on the fly, even during battles. This is one aspect of the game I absolutely adore and wish more RPGs would follow suit. The battle system is very simple, pretty much emulating previous Final Fantasy titles. You can select commands such as attack, use magic or items, and of course run away. It's all turn-based and moves quickly. While the battle system is extremely intuitive, I do have a major gripe, and that is the automatic cursor memory. Once you select a command during battle, on your very next turn, the cursor will default to the last action taken. It's frustrating considering 3/4 of the game, the battles are so easy, you'll just spam the hell out of the attack command most of the time. I really hate it. The first few hours I spent playing Mystic Quest, I was actually enjoying it and couldn't understand why people hated it so much. Yeah, it's overly simple, but that's just the nature of the game. Well, after a few more hours, it started to sink in. The battles for the most part are so simple, they require more button spamming than strategy, and it gets old real quick. About halfway through the game, I found myself just wishing it would end, and probably would just have stopped playing it if it wasn't for this review. The game was longer than I had expected, taking about 14 hours to complete, and wasn't until the final couple of dungeons that I started to have more fun due to the increased difficulty of the monsters near the end that finally took a bit of strategy to defeat. I can't say that I really recommend this game to anyone, even beginners. The characters and storyline are just blah, and so are the graphics, although the enemy sprites change as they take damage, which is pretty nifty. The highlight of the game is without a doubt the music. Like all Final Fantasy tunes, the score is outstanding, although composed by Ryuji Sasai and Yasuhiro Kawakami rather than Final Fantasy veteran Nobuo Uematsu. If you're new to the role-playing genre, then I recommend Final Fantasy Origins instead, which is the first two Final Fantasy games rebooted, available on the PlayStation, or the Game Boy Advance version, which is called Final Fantasy 1 and 2 Dawn of Souls. It's where the Final Fantasy series began, fixing all of the problems which would render the original titles obsolete. Both versions are inexpensive, and Origins can be downloaded from the PlayStation Store for $10. Now, if you're a die-hard Final Fantasy fan, I recommend this game for your collection, and just to say that you've experienced it. This cartridge is also inexpensive for the most part, and is available on the Wii Virtual Console for $8. Otherwise, skip it. While you'll get no argument from me that Americans are, for the most part, idiots, Japan underestimated the US's intellectual deficiency and dumbed this game down way too much.